All right, hello and welcome to this episode where we're going to continue our series on common mistakes that people make when it comes to OCD and anxiety recovery. And so for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mac Hottie and I'm the founder of Restored Minds, and I'm also a licensed clinical social worker, and I specialize in OCD and anxiety. And today I want to talk about the third mistake that people make that I see very common, and it's really this idea of trying to use the tools to cure OCD and anxiety. And so what I mean by that is that when people are starting off in their journey to recovery, right, what commonly happens is that they are looking for a solution to what they perceive to be the problem, right? Meaning if they are having intrusive thoughts that are, running through their mind, if they're having, a lot of anxiety, panic, all sorts of stuff, right? That's what people perceive to be the problem. That's what I perceived to be the problem. In fact, even beyond that, they'll be worrying about what the content of the thoughts they're having is, right? And that's what they even perceive to be the problem when they're really, really lost in that chaos. And the reality is that when you think that's your problem, then you're looking for tools to solve that problem, and you get presented with this idea of exposure and response prevention, right? And it was commonly called ERP, right? And what the mistake that people make is that they try to use ERP to cure, quote unquote, their OCD and anxiety. And that creates a lot of frustration because ERP is not designed to do that. Right. I mean, and so you're using this tool to try to get a result that you believe is the end result you want, and you're not going to get it using that tool. So it creates frustration with both the person seeking help and, the treatment provider, or, just the whole situation in general. And so what I want to do today is I kind of want to talk about what ERP is really used for. Right. And so when I'm talking about ERP, again, I'm talking about exposure and response prevention. What we're really talking about here is exposing yourself or experiencing the very thing that you're afraid of, both in all the internal stuff. Right. So external and internal. So we're talking about the thoughts that you don't want to have. And we're also talking about the feelings that you don't want to have. Right. So the thoughts and anxiety. And then we're preventing ourselves from doing anything that's going to reinforce that, right? So, a very common example of this is the idea of someone with a fear of contamination, and they will expose themselves to a contaminated object, let's say a door handle, and they touch it, right? And this flood of anxiety will come up. A lot of thoughts will race. Well, what if it's contaminated? What if I get this disease? What if I die? All these kind of thoughts, right? And that is the exposure, right? The exposure is to bring up all the internal stuff and what we do with exposure in response prevention, exposure therapy, is we are experiencing the feared situation, right? And then we're not getting in the conversation, essentially, right? We're not getting into the voice in our head. We're not going to start analyzing the thoughts. We're not going to start trying to get rid of the feelings. We're just going to let it all happen, right? And it's really uncomfortable, right? Which is one of the reasons people don't like ERP, right? And obviously, no one likes going through it. But what happens is if we actually don't respond to a way that reinforces it, then our brain learns that it's not actually dangerous, and it essentially eventually stops setting off that alarm. But the moment that we, touch that contaminated object and then wash our hands, well, our brain's going to learn that that's dangerous, right, through conditioning, and it ultimately keeps setting that alarm off in the future. And then we're going to have to wash more to get the same relief. And that's why the anxiety cycle and the OCD cycle is a big trap that people fall in, is because if it's essentially a false alarm going off. And with ERP, what we're actually doing is we're showing our brain that it doesn't need to set off that alarm, but we have to do that through removing the behaviors. So again, ERP is not designed to get rid of your anxiety. In fact, what it's designed to do is to feel it and actually trigger it, right? But the reason is because if we do that and we do it effectively, then what happens is that our brain learns that it wasn't dangerous, and eventually will stop setting it off. So the secondary effect of ERP is over the long term, your brain stops producing that anxiety response, that fear response, that stress response to that incident, right? Because it learns that it's not dangerous. But the only way it can learn to do that is if you do nothing behaviorally to reinforce the idea that it's dangerous. Okay, so it's really important that we make that connection, because what so many people do is they read about ERP, or they go on the internet, or and they see a video and they're like, okay, well, I tried ERP and it didn't work. Well, one of the reasons that it, quote, didn't work is that you were using it in the wrong context. If you use ERP and then still feel anxiety, well, yeah, by its very nature, that, quote, didn't work because you're not using it correctly. It's like using a hammer to saw a piece of wood in half, right? If your end goal is not correct, then this tool is going to seem like it doesn't work. Again, the goal of ERP is not to get rid of thoughts and feelings, right? What's the paradoxical effect of ERP is that if we do it enough and we actually don't respond, our brain stops producing those thoughts and feelings. But if we're using it to try to achieve that result, we're always going to consistently check for thoughts, check for feelings, analyze, do all these compulsions, which is going to keep that loop going. And that's the trap that people fall in. The mistake is that they use ERP as thinking that it's an I do A and I get B, right? A plus B, right? It's like this result is going to come, and then it doesn't happen the way they think it should, because again, they misunderstand the problem, and then therefore they think that the tool doesn't work for them and they just give up. And that's a big common mistake. And so I wanted to address that in this episode, because if we understand why we're doing ERP, and more importantly, we understand what the real problem is with anxiety and OCD, which again is behavioral, right? That's why cognitive behavioral therapy is shown again and again to be the best treatment for it, meaning how we respond to our thoughts and how we respond to our feelings, right? And the behaviors that we engage in, like that is what we're ultimately changing and essentially reprogramming and rewiring our brain through neuroplasticity. Once we understand that that's what ERP is actually doing, well, then it makes sense in the grander scale. Now, we go, much more in depth to this into our, our Taking Back Control program. And we teach you the steps about specifically how you need to respond to each thought, what to do behaviorally, all that. But what I wanted to talk about specifically in this episode really is just this idea of you can't use ERP to try to cure yourself, because you're going to fall into that trap of doing ERP, checking to see how you're feeling, checking to see if your thoughts are still there, checking to see if this still makes you anxious. And when you notice any kind of feeling or thought, you're going to think that ERP doesn't work. But if that's the case, you're just using it incorrectly. And again, when we understand the big picture goal of why we do ERP and how it works, that's what allows us to apply it successfully. And then as a secondary gain, when we actually apply it successfully, that's when we actually get the lower levels of anxiety, the decrease in thoughts, and all that as a secondary gain of doing ERP correctly. So hopefully that makes sense. And, I hope you found this helpful. And again, if you did, we would really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing and leaving a review over on iTunes as well. And also, we have some additional resources for you on your journey, including some more additional free training over at our site, Restored Minds. And we also have some additional downloads and just other things to help you on your journey, as well as our coaching programs and consulting programs. So thank you so much for tuning in this week, and I hope you guys have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Hey there, Matt here, and thank you for watching that video. And if you're struggling with stress and anxiety, I just want to let you know that I have a free 7-minute meditation that I'd like to give to you. You can just click the link right down in the notes to get instant access, and we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing to our channel. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon.